Well, a councillor at La Trobe City Council in Melbourne's East has been suspended from her elected position for social media posts critical of the transgender political agenda. Now, the only people who should be able to suspend or remove from office an elected person in a democracy are the voters. Unless, of course, there's some type of criminal activity involved. Well, apparently not in the case of Councillor Melissa Ferguson. It seems questioning the LGBTIQA+ political agenda is enough to have even democracy itself cancelled in Australia these days. According to the ABC, a councillor code of conduct panel last week found Councillor Ferguson had engaged in serious misconduct by failing to genuinely apologise about her social media activity after a previous arbitration process. The ABC reposted one of her supposedly offensive tweets where she expressed concern about taxpayers' money going to people pushing confused children into transgenderism. Councillor Ferguson expressed concern that other needy youth were missing out on public funding as a result. Now, that seems totally fair, reasonable comment as far as I can see. But she was reported by a fellow councillor, Tracy Lund, and forced to appear before an independent arbiter. Seems a little bit like the Soviet Eastern Bloc. The Victorian Government's Principal Councillor Conduct Registrar appointed a Dr. Meredith Gibbs as an independent arbiter to review the complaint. Dr. Gibbs found in June last year that Councillor Ferguson breached the councillor code of conduct by posting a series of tweets critical of the trans community, or supposedly critical of the trans community. Now, Dr. Gibbs agreed with Councillor Lund's assertion that one tweet suggested that trans people in general are predators, perpetrating perversion and abuse and preying on children, end quote. Now, I'm deeply concerned that we are seeing a severe erosion of freedom of speech in this country, and one of the main political movements working against freedom of speech is the LGBTIQA+ political movement. So I've asked suspended councillor Melissa Ferguson onto the show. I need to stress that she is speaking only in her capacity as a citizen and not as a councillor. That is her wish for the purposes of today's interview. She joins me now from Melbourne. Melissa, welcome. Melissa...
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Melissa, whose decision was it to suspend you from council? Was it a decision of your council colleagues at last week's meeting or by some independent arbiter?
Well, yes, by a questionably independent arbiter that's appointed by the Victorian State Government to a misconduct panel. So it's an internal arbitration process, not a court of law.
Right, so was that decision then ratified by your council?
Yes, so what happens then, the findings are then passed down and then it's tabled in the council chambers, and it was passed and tabled.
Did you ever think that in a democracy that anyone other than the voters could suspend an elected person from elected office?
Well, what's concerning me more is that people don't see anything wrong with it. A large amount of people don't seem to have a problem with a system that's not actually based on open justice or solid evidence, but quite often the opinion of the arbiter. And to be able to then take those findings and shame people through the media, to me, is not a good thing when people haven't had a proper hearing.
Were you able to have any legal representation with the arbiter?
Yeah, so we can refer to a lawyer. I've been through a few arbitrations now. If you're lucky, sometimes you can get indemnified, which will cover you to get advice from a lawyer. But there is a section of the Local Government Act in Victoria which allows the panel to decide that it's not necessary to have your lawyer in there to represent you. I'm not sure if it's ever happened before, but I've always been told that it wasn't necessary to have my lawyers in the room, so you end up representing yourself.
Now, I want to get into the substance of your tweets, but how long are you actually suspended for?
30 days.
30 days, yeah, so you can't attend a council meeting or presumably go to your office and look after your constituents?
Correct. It really is hard seeing things that you know that you could help. because that's my primary focus in this role, is helping the constituents, and it's really created a lot of white noise and distraction from the actual role of a councillor.
Yep.
But, there was 30-day suspension, but the applicant was actually pushing for 6 months.
Wow.
Which would have, of course, pushed me out, and the next election would come along, and that would leave my ward without a council representation for 6 months. And I do quite a lot in the background that I'm not vocal about, and they'd miss out on all of that.
Of course they would. Well, Melissa, what exactly did you post on Twitter, formerly X, that has caused all this trouble?
Well, the cartoon that they're referring to, it was more around the concern of the self-ID, and actually wasn't about trans as such, but as people that are less than desirable, perverted people using that process of self-ID. It wasn't directed at them at all. But my concern at that time was obviously that what if someone misuses that component, that now we have this self-ID law? And I think it's a common concern that lots of people hold. What if the wrong person utilises that? So it wasn't really directed at the trans industry at all. I mean, trans people at all.
No, that concern is absolutely valid. I mean, we've seen examples of biological males identifying as women in women's prisons, and women being assaulted as a result. We've seen women being assaulted in their toilet blocks. We saw in New South Wales here last year a supposed female, a biological male, expose what the magistrate called her penis in a female toilet in New South Wales. So your concern is absolutely valid. Why is your fellow councillor complaining about this?
I think we've just got different ideas on things, and that's okay. In my book, that is quite okay for people to have different views. So I'm quite shocked that this has been framed this way, when it was, that's another thing, the whole system doesn't take intent into account at all. So even if you've got no ill intent, you'll still be found guilty, which would not fly in a court of law at all.
Yeah, there's just no natural justice in any of this process. Are you still being remunerated? I know councillors don't get paid a lot of money, but are you still getting remunerated while you're suspended?
No, unfortunately, at this time in my life, it was my sole income, which they were aware of. And I think that's why they've reasoned not to go with the 6 months push by the applicant, but a month. But it's still a month without pay to get by.
This is outrageous. So you've expressed a concern that many mainstream Australians feel, and many women's activists are fighting for, and that is the protection of girls' and women's spaces. And you've not only has democracy been set aside, but your livelihood. This is not justice. This is truly Eastern Bloc, former Soviet type activity. It's totalitarianism.
Well, that's right. Yes. I do see it as a Soviet-style system. That's the truth, and I've voiced that before and it's not appreciated by the arbitrators, the arbiters that I've actually used that term, but it does feel a lot like Mao cultural war sort of thing, where you get shamed and humiliated and attacked. The cyberbullying is beyond belief. But I mean, the thing is, it's just such an unjust thing, and if you speak up, they just attack harder. But I'm not going to step down, because I think, things are changing in our country. And if I can make a stand and show that you can stand up, and you must keep your voice, not be silenced, because in these processes you're silenced about the topic for months on end, which can be really hard mentally as well. And I just don't feel it's a just system. And I've openly been a critic of that from the start. So I don't believe it's effective. Now, the Premier has announced that she's going to do a reform on this, and the reforms appear to make it so you can't challenge anything at all.
Sure.
And if you do, it has to go to Supreme Court like mine would, and it's extremely costly, and it's at your personal expense.
So that's the Labor Premier, Jacinta Allen. So she's doubling down, and instead of supporting people like you that are suffering as a result of this anti-free speech rules and regulations, she's making it harder. What's John Pesciuto, the Liberal leader in Victoria, saying about your case?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The only MP who's represented me is Moira Deeming. She's actually stood up and said, stop the reign of terror, because this is quite traumatic on people.
Absolutely.
And I'm disappointed. Like, I wish the Premier would actually look deeper, but because they've put that label on everyone as misbehaving councillors, and then the shame and what have you, you can't really seem to appear to have any review on our rights on the other end of things.
Yeah. What would happen to you, Melissa, if once you're reinstated to council in a month's time, if you then began again publicly participating in debate about the appropriateness of biological males and women's space and women's sport? What would happen to you if you resumed that sort of public commentary again?
I believe I would be up for another code of conduct. And I believe a lot of it has been exaggerated. What I must stress, and I've been trying to stress to people, is I can't now show those tweets to people to show what the content actually was, because they've been deemed offensive. So if I put them up, I'm then punished again. So I have my defence papers on my Facebook page where I've outlined a description. What concerns me is some of those tweets were regarding what I find extremely concerning, and that's the academic normalising of pedophilia. Now, a lot of these academic articles that I was reading weren't even based in Australia, let alone in my local community. So I failed to see how any of it was relevant or, to be honest, anyone's business.
Well, you're right to comment about those sort of things. There is a lot of academic commentary these days, particularly overseas, about minor attracted persons trying to legitimise pedophilia. So you're right to raise that concern. This is outrageous that the LGBTIQA plus political movement has doubled down. They're using flawed apparatus of the state to silence you, to take away your remuneration, your income. This is not Australia. Melissa, I really appreciate your courage, appreciate you sharing this, and would love to just continue to follow your case here on ADH TV.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I guess my message is that it was never intentional to hurt anybody.
Of course.
And as I've said all along, offence is subjective.
Yeah, and that's the trouble. Well, Melissa, thank you for your time, and keep up the fight and stay strong.
Okay, thank you very much.